I'm Oscar Young, I work at Stanley Gibbons, and here today we're going to talk to you about the life and times of Rowland Hill, the great post office reformer, and explain the story of how a schoolmaster left a legacy that changed the world. Rowland Hill was born in 1795 in Kidderminster, which is not too far outside Worcester, and was the son of a schoolmaster. And his father brought the family down from Worcester to Tottenham in North London and to establish a much larger school in an old mansion which was renamed into Bruce Castle. Now, Bruce Castle School is still around in some shape or form, but though the original Victorian building is not used as much, but it has been saved from modern redevelopments as it's a listed building, which I think is very good to hear. Prior to Rowland Hill's postal reforms, the postal service in Britain was very ad hoc. It was a charmant affair of complicated rates and procedures, and the charges for posting items was astronomical compared to the concept of uniform postage. Letters from London to Edinburgh would cost 1 shilling and halfpenny, an astronomical sum for the service that you were getting. And of course, it would take days to get there, maybe even weeks. And of course, there was no guarantee the post office would actually get the money, because payment was taken by the receiver, not the sender. With the such high costs of postage, there were often occasions where people refused payment for their letters. And of course, rather than the postman knocking on your door and saying, "I have a letter for you, Mr. Smith," it was, "Can I interest you in this letter for you, Mr. Smith, at 1 shilling and halfpenny?" And of course, people would say, "1 shilling and halfpenny? I shan't pay that," and slam the door in their faces. And of course, there was also occasions where people wrote in code, and they would simply look at the envelope, read the message of what they had, and say, "No, thank you, Mr. Postman, I will not pay this fee." And of course, the costs involved in that, it cost them 1 shilling to send the letter, and it cost them 1 shilling to send it back to London. It was clear that reform was urgently needed. There was also the issue of free francs. Now, free francs had been around for quite a while, and they were used by members of the public of rank and influence, including members of the House of Lords, House of Commons, and other great and noble people, including also members of the royal family. And of course, these groups, of course, very much enjoyed not having to pay for postage, but the cost had to be taken elsewhere, and Royal Mail would increase their charges. Rowland Hill criticised heavily the post office at the time in his very famous pamphlet now, The Post Office Reform, Its Importance and Practicability. And after his stifling attacks on the post office and its current system of complex rates and payment on receipt methods, he then put forward a very interesting proposal, the concept of prepayment and of a universal rate. I shall just read a sample here from this wonderful book written by Robson Lowe, and this is what he said. Having intact, he proposed in the pamphlet to rebuild the postal service, that there should be a uniform postage charge of 1 penny per half ounce for every letter received in a post town to be delivered to any other town within the British Isles, including Ireland, as it was still part of Britain at that time, that to avoid the complex arrangements of payment only on delivery. Postal charges should be levied in advance at the office where the letter was posted. Such a concept was enormously radical for the time. Now, letters had been charged by weight and the number of sheets of paper, and then charged again upon arrival at these places. Now, the idea that of one payment to anywhere else in the country was absolutely astonishing to the post office. They thought they would lose thousands of pounds in revenue, and Rowland came up against many opponents to this scheme, including the Duke of Wellington, who was a staunch opposer of uniform penny postage before he then voted for the bill when it came before Parliament in 1839, after being convinced by Rowland Hill's arguments and many other of his colleagues and contemporaries. Rowland Hill in the pamphlet would go on to say that a bit of paper just large enough to bear the stamp and covered at the back with a glutinous wash, which the user might, by applying a little moisture, attach to the back of the letter. Now, of course, in his little silly remark there, we can very much say that that was very much the birth of the postage stamp. The idea of a small piece of paper, just large enough to bear the stamp, of course, the value, that would be placed on the envelope. Now, in that little idea, written in a few little lines, went on to create the communication revolution which changed the world and was one of the great leading inventions of its time. Of course, the idea of a uniform postage rate wasn't entirely original. It had been around since the 17th century. London enjoyed a London local penny postage, and if anyone out there collects pre-stamped mail, you'll often find penny charges for London local areas. I handled one recently going to Richmond, which was rather nice. And so, of course, the idea of expanding that just from the boundaries within London or in local areas to the whole country was indeed quite radical. There were many critiques of Rowland Hill, members of Parliament, and even the Postmaster General of the time slammed down the idea of saying that it would bankrupt the postal service and that such a scheme would never work. However, Rowland Hill did have many supporters, including people from the new trading and business classes, the rising middle classes that were wanting to send letters and orders to their customers and clients and communications across the country. You also had newspapers. Newspapers had stamps prior to that. For the stamp was placed upon the newspaper paying the tax, but the idea that you could now apply postage to the newspaper to actually send it to someone was a much better idea for postage delivery. Rowland Hill also in his pamphlet inadvertently created the concept of a post box as well. The idea that people could have a letter box in their house that the postman could simply slide the letter through and carry on with his day, though post boxes and letter boxes didn't necessarily come into fashion until sometime a bit later. Whilst Rowland Hill had great support amongst the laity for his penny postage reforms, it met with great criticism from the political establishment. And I'll read a section here from the Postmaster General, Lord Lichfield, who said, "With respect to the plans set forth by Mr. Hill, of all the wild and visionary schemes which I have ever heard or read of, is it the most extravagant," which is effectively a polite Victorian way of saying he thought his idea was silly. However, such was the demand and need for postal reform that the government had to take notice, and in 1839, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Mr. Thomas Springrice, which is a really catchy name, introduced as part of his budget proposal to the House the resolution that letters and postage should be reduced and based on weight, that the franking privileges should be abolished, and the official franking should be strictly limited. Of course, people were aghast that MPs would lose their franking privileges, and members of the House of Lords as well would not be able to send letters for free. A week later, the Chancellor moved that the report on the Postage Act should be received, and the House voted for penny postage. And in common style, the bill was accepted by 215 ayes against 113 noes, with many abstentions. The Postage Duties Bill was then passed to the Lords, and it passed through the Lords as well after great reluctance from many of its members, including the Duke of Wellington, who commented, "I shall, although with great reluctance, vote for the bill." The Postmaster General, Lord Lichfield, who was still in his post at the time, opined that there should be a considerable loss of revenue to the post office, but, of course, on the simple grounds and demand that the bill had measured that it was for universal usage, and also voted for the bill. And the Postage Duties Bill received royal assent on the 17th of August, 1839. And of course, before uniform penny postage could be ruled out, they had to bring the rates down gradually. So it then became uniform four-penny postage before, in January of 1840, becoming the penny postage, and then towards the spring of 1840, on the 6th of May, the penny black was first issued as the world's first postage stamp for sale for postage across the country. And indeed, it's where our hobby was born. Now, the story of how the penny black was designed and issued is one we've spoken about before and is well written in books such as this, which is an invaluable resource written by a great philatelist and philatelic historian, Robson Lowe. Rowland Hill would later work for the post office for many years to come before retirement. He was knighted in 1860, and he was a very, well-respected person and well thought of at that time. Statues of him were made up in his local town of Kidderminster, and I believe there's even a monument to him as well in Westminster Abbey. He died at the age of 84 in 1879, and in his time had brought great reforms to the postal service, and indeed it really affected the whole world. It's down to him that the world is well connected as it is. Before that, it was an ad hoc system, impractical and expensive, and now a one price goes anywhere rate is now very much in use right across the world, and Royal Mail still honour that promise today of uniform payment postage, though first and second class costs a lot more than a penny nowadays. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and as always, please like and subscribe for more Stanley Gibbons content.